Welcome to the Edgevana Podcast, where we illuminate subjects in the IT infrastructure space. Get ready to hear some amazing insights from outstanding individuals that will change the way you think about IT. And now, here's your host, Mark Thiele.
So welcome to another edition of the Edgevana Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Thiele, and today I'm joined by the inscrutable, the amazing, the wanderer, the running man himself, Tom Lounibos. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. That scares me, that introduction. I'm not sure where we're going on this journey, but let's see where we go. We've done this before, so let's see what happens.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, we could talk about what we were just talking about for a full hour, and that's the VC world. We could talk about big companies. We could talk about service mesh or mesh versus supply chains. But today, I really want to get into a little bit of Tom and how Tom became such a big part of and change agent to a company the size of Accenture. I think it's an amazing story. I mean, I think your story is amazing. Combining your story with a company like Accenture, I think, is something that you just don't see very often. And so for the few people in the audience that don't know Tom, Tom's got an amazing history in the technology space. He's an entrepreneur with a track record as founder and CEO, 40 years of entrepreneur experience, building 6 startups with 6 successful exits, including 2 IPOs, KnowledgeWare and Sagent. How did you end up at Accenture, a $44 billion SI, as their global managing director or president of Accenture Ventures? How does that even happen? Right.
Well, we've been joking about this. This is probably the number one WTF question that is asked for the past year for me. All my friends in the Silicon Valley, whether it's Sand Hill Road or frankly around the world, have been trying to figure it out. And I recognize it's not intuitive, but once I explain the journey, and we'll try to explain a little bit today, it's ultimately the same journey as every one of my startups. It starts off with a thought, and then it kind of evolves, and you have a Henry Ford moment, and it evolves. But yeah, and thanks for that kind introduction. I've been lucky. When you surround yourself with really, really talented people, and I've been really fortunate to have great people like Ken Gardner and others that have been my partners along the way, then you get lucky in life sometimes, and I have been lucky in life. And it has been a journey. There's been 6 different companies that I've been involved with as a founder or executive or the CEO. A lot of them CEOs. And the range of technologies have been really different. They started off when we were coming off mainframes and moving into client server environments, and we created a company called KnowledgeWare around computer-aided software engineering, the ability to rapidly build client server applications. And then that kind of morphed into, and that went public back in the 80s, and then I went very heavily into analytics, and so server-side analytics. So remember MicroStrategies and Business Objects and Cognos, those were client-side and server-side analytics engines. And then there was Informatica, which was an extraction. So we created an engine, and we, Ken and I, created a company called Sagent Technologies that was an extraction capability as well as an analytics company. And that went public in the 90s, and then subsequently a few other companies were built and acquired by major companies. So we're fortunate. But the way I got here started about 5 years ago with a phone conversation with Paul Doherty. And I was running, as you know, Mark, but the audience probably doesn't know, but there's a company that Ken and I started again, are getting the band back together again. And that happened a lot. I had a lot of my team come from different successes, and we just kept wanting to play together, as we all do. And by the way, congratulations on your new venture. This is really cool. And so about 5 years ago, I had started a company with Ken back in 2006 or so, called SOSTA, and SOSTA was an advanced analytics engine for cloud computing. And if you go back, there wasn't cloud computing really there, but I got introduced to Andy Jassy back in 2005 or six. He introduced me to his concept called cloud computing before he had an API, and I had a problem that I was trying to solve to how do you simulate the internet for testing environments and advanced analytics that might come from it. And so SOSTA became this really interesting company because of our use case in the early days of cloud computing. We needed Andy's whole business plan to Jeff was, hey, there's millions of developers out there that need compute capability, but only for like a week or a month or whatever. So a single developer needing a server for a week or a month. And my use case was, I need 5,000 servers all around the world for 4 hours. And so Andy and Werner and the rest of the guys kind of fell in love with our use case. And so subsequently, I was on stages with you a lot of times around the world. And, I remember our time in Shanghai together and other times. And we were the early days of cloud computing. So you and I and others were Clouderati or whatever the hell that name was. And so Paul calls up. So Paul Doherty is an extraordinary guy. Didn't know him before he called me up, by the way. He was the CTO of Accenture. And he called up and basically said, hey, I'd like to invest in your company. And I said, well, that's cool, Paul, and it's really nice to meet you, but no. and the reason wasn't because I was trying to be aloof. We were kind of late stage at that point, and our valuations were pretty high. And I just kind of was honest with them to say, we're a little late, and, for you guys to be kind of getting in. So it started a dialogue that has continued over the years. And then we sold SOSTA to Akamai a couple of years ago. And to be honest with you, Mark, I thought I was done. I think I told you this before in Laguna. And after 40 plus years in the Silicon Valley, that's a pretty good career for anybody. And I was proud of it and proud of all the successes. And so my wife and I, Tracy, we said, okay, we're done. And we went off to Scotland for 6 months or so to kind of get as far away from the Silicon Valley as I could. And when I came back, Paul called again and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I think I'm retired. I'm not sure what this means as an entrepreneur. But he goes, hey, would you come in and advise Julie, who the new CEO, and myself on, ventures and entrepreneurs? We want to get more entrepreneurial at Accenture. And I said, wow, that's extraordinary. That's an extraordinary ask. And I kind of said, you don't really want to bring me in because I'm going to point out all the bad things and all the things that I went to. But a startup is quite a bit different than a 500,000 employee company that's 44 billion in revenues and 175 billion or whatever in market cap. So I'm not sure it's relevant, to be honest with you, my input. Saying, no, that's what we want. So I came in initially as an advisor, and I jokingly was trying to figure out, okay, how can I add value to this team? They've done really well, and they're a services company, and I'm a software guy. And I was pretty cynical, to be honest with you. I was, I had always been on so many different boards where all of my colleagues on the board, whenever a CEO would say, we're going to partner with a SI firm like Deloitte or Accenture, it was like, oh, don't do that. It's death by meeting. You'll screw up your execution. Don't, this is a scary thing. And so I came in with a bit of that attitude. And then the other attitude was a little bit of SIs and other companies, big companies would come in and say, well, we're going to help you scale. And then it ended up, that didn't really happen because you had to go and find the customer and bring them in more often than not. So that was my skepticism. And when I came in, and what the Henry Ford moment for me, which means this moment where the idea clicks on, is when I pulled myself away from my own cynicism and began to explore this company from a standpoint of asset class, kind of what I do with every startup, what could we be done? And then it dawned on me. And then I began to see, I think it started with I think everything starts with me with a question. I'm always starting with a question and what's the answer? So my question was, what's the derivative value from being the most trusted advisor to the Global 2000 for the past 30 years.
Yep.
And that's when it dawned on me, and I began to see this deep, deep domain expertise and the labs around the world. And that's where we began to build what I now call Project Spotlight. But and then I got so into it because the potential of Project Spotlight to kind of at least give a different perspective to the venture capital / entrepreneur relationship that I feel is a bit broken over the last few years, that needs to get improved. It's not intentional. It's no one's at fault on either side. It just could be better. And so how could we make it better? And, you know, it used to be, here's a check and we have a great Rolodex. That was 40 years ago. And we'll do a handshake, we'll do a deal. Then it became very committee oriented within the venture community. And then Mark and Ben at Andreessen Horowitz changed it by adding, we have marketing and other capabilities. We can help you scale and do things. I saw within the Accenture relationship something really, really unique that I frankly didn't think about when I first came in. And that's what now we're doing. We're building and packaging around Project Spotlight. So long journey, long answer. Sorry to kind of be long-winded here, but I will tell you that I'm having more fun, or as much fun, as I've ever had in 40 years.
It really is amazing. It's an amazing story and a fantastic journey. You know, congratulations to you on both your history and on the change you're impacting on the industry through Accenture. And I mean, I remember that time. When was it? Was it a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, when I stopped in and visited you at the offices in San Francisco, and we talked about the potential for this before it even became a reality. And even then, you know, after 15 or 20 minutes of you explaining the opportunity, I thought this, in retrospect, really does seem like a no-brainer. I mean, here you are with the engine and as you already pointed out, the relationship of trusted advisor, which I think we even both talked about at the time, is really the model going forward for tech sales anyway. The original salesperson in the complex tech space is really kind of going out the door. It's the trusted advisor relationship nowadays that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think what got me was, you know, I sat on all these boards and over the years, my own and others, and I always recognized that there was two legs of a stool on the board, but the third leg, the most critical leg, was missing. And, you know, so all of us that are on this call recognize that you have the entrepreneur, which is fundamentally the technology. And so you have the representation of the architecture and the technology inside the boardroom, the founders. And then you've got the finance guys, you've got the venture guys that bring the capital, and both are very much required, very essential. But the element that's not in the boardroom more often than not, especially at early stages, was the market, you know, the client, you know, what problems are you solving? So as an entrepreneur, all of us, we spend the first couple of years or 2 or 3 years sometimes, validating our idea in the marketplace, trying to find that killer app that we used to say back in the 80s. And in that point of time, all of us entrepreneurs also, as we were trying to validate our market and frankly, going into the dark room, you know, moving around, we lost about 80% of our shareholder equity in doing that while we were trying to do this. So when I began to look at Accenture, I realized, you know, there is no venture firm in the world that has 10 laboratories, research laboratories around the world that have deep science knowledge about things like homomorphic encryption or category theory or XR or quantum capabilities. So as a venture capitalist, okay, I've got a bunch of scientists around that are really deep science. And then I didn't have to raise LP money. You know, we're taking it off balance sheet. We're a traditional corporate venture partner. So I'm not going to spend all my time on the road running around trying to herd the cats of LPs. I've got it off balance. So, okay, that's good. But the real, what I called the book of secrets that I felt was extraordinary, was that point about being the trusted advisor. This deep domain expertise in everything from fintech to digital health to supply chains, to whatever it may be, but also the impacts of things like regulatory or COVID or whatever the impacts may be. There's no one in the world that understands this at a technology layer more than Accenture from my perspective. So what my perspective of Paul was, if we could package that, if we could productize that, if we could weaponize it, and then bring it to the earliest stage companies that we think are meaningful, then we can compress their time to validation while form factoring the technology to the market needs in a much tighter formation.
Right.
So that was the formation of an immersive engagement model and investment model that I now call Project Spotlight.
Yeah. So that's great. And you sort of lead me in, if I took that last point you made correctly, you sort of lead me into my next question. And there are numerous opportunities for, at least in my little brain, as I see going forward, for how this would continue to develop, right?
Yeah.
And even through some of our conversations, I think I know the answer to some of this, but when I look at this, if I'm you, I'm looking at this and I'm going, I could help push companies in the direction that I think my enterprise partners and customers need. I could help develop technologies that they're already asking for, but I need to accelerate.
Right.
I could invest in companies that become offerings from Accenture.
Right.
And in some cases, I might do all three of those things.
Right.
Am I missing anything? How do you see that? What do you see as kind of like 5 years from now, right?
Yeah, I think, I think Paul's only advice he gave to me when I came in was think different. And I said, well, that's kind of intuitive for me. That's, I started when Steve and I started together, basically, Steve Jobs, so his think different narrative of the 1997 commercial, the crazy ones. I guess I'm one of the crazy ones. When I looked at the investment thesis kind of concept, I decided I didn't like it. I didn't like what most people did, which was basically chase technologies. So let's go after blockchain, or let's go after AI or quantum. It became a marketing fad for investors in some ways. I don't think that's intention or was the deliverable, but I just was looking for something a little bit different than chasing the technology. And so again, I went back to my roots as an entrepreneur, and what's the question? What questions am I asking? And then that also tied very directly to that Henry Ford moment inside of Accenture, that Accenture's really core strength is their domain expertise. Yep. So I began to work and collaborate with all the leaders inside of Accenture. What are the top 10 business questions for the Global 2000 in 2021? What will they be? And so things like the skills gap, we need, skills. We don't have the skills. There's a shift in the labor markets that have gone from what they used to be 2 to 3% on an annual basis now are 8 to 9%. That's jobs going away, new jobs created, a lot of them because of automation and other things.
Right.
And if in post-COVID environment, it's actually more like 30% in some areas. So how do we handle skills gaps, or how do we handle, as a multinational company, data privacy issues, GDPR, Schrems 2 that just came out about 2 months ago, or even in California, CCPA. And so when we began to frame the investment thesis, not on the how do you deliver it, but what are the questions we're trying to do, we began to see ecosystems. We began to, and inside the ecosystems, there were white spaces that were inhibiting progress, of change, of innovation. And so we focused our investment thesis to big questions and white spaces inside those environments, inside those ecosystems. And that is the basis and the foundations of our investment thesis. So we also obviously try to say, okay, is this the next billion-dollar practice inside of Accenture? Sure. And so is there opportunity for Accenture to, either through co-innovation or through services or whatever it may be, how can we help this? And when you look at the domain expertise, that's one element of Accenture's strength. The other is integration. They're well known for their ERP kind of integrations with SAP. So we're in probably the greatest, integration problem of my 42 years with microservices architectures, where everything we do are connecting pieces and piece parts into solutions. And so having strength in integration, having strength in the domain are all part of the Project Spotlight program.
Right. No, it totally makes sense. And so I've got at least two more questions that I want to squeeze in before we run out of time, Tom. And the first one is in sort of a direct correlation to what you were just saying. And this isn't meant to be cruel to a potential startup in the posse of startups that you're worried about. But do you see this as, again, it's not really meant to be cynical, although it does sound cynical, as an opportunity to say, we could spend, as an organization our size, by accident, $30 or $40 million figuring out that we shouldn't do something. Whereas you could spend $2 or $3 million on a startup and figure out the same thing, or figure out that you should, right? I mean, is that a reality?
Oh, I think so. I think this is the other aspect that I keep coming back to it. Clearly I've drank in the Kool-Aid of Accenture, but what makes us a little bit different than a traditional corporate VC or CVC as they're called, specifically in a software company, is that we're not a software company.
Right.
And so we're not intentional in terms of trying to build a platform or commercial grade software. We're not competitive in that regard as well. But we are all about trying to solve big questions. And, one of the big questions today is, how do you distribute vaccines to 7.8 billion people in 179 countries around the world at speed?
Yep.
And there's not a lot of companies in the world that could actually put that together except for Accenture. And so it's going to require hundreds of ecosystem partners that we already have relationships with, and potentially hundreds of new companies, emerging companies that are secret sauce in between, the cartilage between the bones, as I would say, that are critical components to it. So what we're trying to do, we don't look at it as a narrative that we could spend X amount of dollars to build it ourselves. There's a couple plays in that regard. I mean, I think we're a 500,000 employee company, and one of my investments is a company called Skyhive that really attacks the skills gap area. Yes. So when it's a neuronet, it's a fascinating company based out of Vancouver, early stage, which uses a method called quantum labor analysis, which decomposes a job down to task level, and takes skill or credentials of a person, your titles, your roles, and breaks them down to skills, and then matches it up. And by doing that, you can fill the skills gaps going forward. It's extraordinary what's going on, and it's exploding. But there's no better petri dish for their platform than the 500,000 people inside of Accenture. How do we find the best cloud architects to put on a cloud migration project that is $100 million cloud migration project at some very big company? How do we find the most optimal players inside our own organization? So we had gone down that road of building something like that when we found Skyhive. And so the investment, the strategies associated to that just makes more sense of utilizing Skyhive versus building it ourselves. That's one exception to the rule where we were building internal systems around that kind of technology. But for the most part, we don't look at software as a build versus buy. We look at it as piece parts to an ecosystem that solve big questions.
Yep. And I think that makes sense. Not that my opinion on this is anywhere near as good as yours, but I think that totally makes sense. Last question before we wrap up. Accenture, by accident or on purpose, has the opportunity to create the kind of market intelligence that Gartner, IDC, and Forrester would literally shit their pants to get.
Yep.
Are you guys using that directly? Is that an opportunity for anyone else? Is that a new business, or is it just something that you guys put to value through programs like yours?
So far, it's put to value through programs like ours. I mean, I think, we certainly, I think that's the essence of what has made them the trusted advisor to the Global 2000. But also, what we respect deeply is data privacy and data governance and data sovereignty, all those aspects that are very important. So, what I believe Accenture has done uniquely has been is being the trusted advisor around data.
Yeah.
And so we're in some ways the curator, the arbitrator of that. So I don't think we would want to violate that in some way for market value, because I think the essence of it is best practices that can come from it. How do you handle it? How do you work out from it? So, that may change. I mean, it's really up to Julie and Paul and the rest of the team to kind of decide that. But I like the fact that what I believe we need as a solution, what I think the fundamental biggest problem going forward is trust in data.
Yeah.
And how can we rebuild the trust in data given all the facial recognition and all the issues associated to it? And it's hard to do it when you're a data platform.
Yep.
To be the trust agent inside it. It's hard to be, if you're Splunk or Snowflake or any of those kinds of guys, which are extraordinary companies, or Oracle or anybody, it's hard to be that because it's you're in a silo.
Yep.
So when you look at who could be the new trusted agent for data and data privacy, I think Accenture is well positioned to that. So I wouldn't want us to violate any kind of conditions for incremental revenue or incremental market value to do that. I think if we can be the name around trust and data, then I think that'll be the more significant play.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend trying to sell it. I was just curious how you guys were thinking about leveraging that internally. And it sounds like Spotlight is a big way to help leverage that information, because if you're investing in a company, my assumption is, and from what you've said already and our previous conversations, is that intelligence is actually helping lead you to make decisions about who to invest in and how much time to spend, how much money to spend.
Yeah, that, Mark, you got it. I mean, what's unique here is there's no VC in the world that has access like I have.
Right.
Access to clients around the world, access to 10 labs around the world with deep scientists, access to thousands of deep domain experts in areas of expertise that are so hard to find. And so what we're doing with Project Spotlight, with those elements of it, is creating a new form of venture capital, a new form of currency that is in the form of trust, is in the form of data and analytics. It's market value. And so while I don't write big checks, my currency is actually probably more valuable at the boardroom table than any other venture capital may be.
Yeah. So that makes sense. Okay, so like Arnold Schwarzenegger in a terrible movie that I won't even recommend, I lied. I'm going to ask you one more question. Sure. I had this same conversation with a supposed friend a couple of days ago this week, and that supposed friend is Derek Collison. You're my supposed friend, and yet neither one of you told me how fucking hard it was and how stupid it was to start a startup. So what the hell?
Well, you will have a love-hate relationship with this concept of creativity, with this concept of startups.
Right.
But it is such an extraordinary journey. What you learn in life is the things that have pulled you hardest, one way or the other, up, down, whatever, are the things that live with you the longest. It's the thing that we will remember on our deathbeds more than anything else. It's like, it's not around our job, it's around our families. That's what we will remember. Well, this is as close to being in a job and having that same passion that we feel about our families.
Right.
And so, you hear it from veterans that have been to war, and the closeness and the camaraderie that comes from it. Well, those were not good moments for those people that went through a war situation, yet they're the memories that are the most lasting.
Right.
This will be the memories that are most lasting, but it will stretch you in all different ways. But look at me, 42 years of doing it. And they just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in using the Godfather line. And it's because I love the game. I love this game.
Yeah.
I could not give this game up for golf. I
Right.
love this game far more.
Well, it's funny, you know, on an ending note, I had a conversation with my dad. I mean, my dad passed away 20 years ago, but had a conversation with him about one of many about his time in the service. And like most folks who actually served and were in combat, he wasn't in hand-to-hand combat type of combat. He flew bombers in both theaters during World War II, and then was in naval intelligence during the Korean War. And so he's lost people, he's had to kill people, and he's just like so many others, unfortunately. And I asked him about his time once, and he said, the thing that bothers me the most, and this is sort of the relationship with what you just answered, is that the thing that bothers him the most is that he can't get away from the fact that it was still the most exciting time of his life. And it's a terrible thing, right? It's like, it's one of those dichotomies you struggle with, right? It's like, wait a minute, people were dying. It was so much deprivation and all that stuff. And yet at the same time, it was the most exciting time of his life, depending on other people and being in a situation where it's a world moving event. And so while a startup isn't a world war, a startup, as you were saying, is very much people in the trenches and people being extremely dependent on each other for some very high and very low times. And so, yeah, I can see the correlation.
There is no correlation to war, but or what our fathers went through during that period of time. But I think the experience is unique is the point. And I find it so compelling that I keep coming back to it because I love it so much. I love the people involved, the creativity involved with it. But you also have to find balance. The thing that I wish if I could have told my younger self was the time that Tracy and I took off for 6 months or whatever was the most valuable and the best experience I had, because it brought me back. Each one of these companies, as they create great things, it also takes a little of your soul away because of how hard it is, and you have to find the balance. So I spend a lot of times talking about mental health to founders because of the pull, the extraordinary gravitational pull that this makes you, create and innovate. You got to find balance. And that's the one thing I'll advise you is, just keep balance. Call me up when you need me. Find other entrepreneurs that have gone through the war zone of startups and then, be able to express it, because it's a lonely job. You can't really tell your employee teams everything about what you're going through, but you've got to find your friends and entrepreneurs trust entrepreneurs. That's another reason why I think Paul and Julie brought me in is I can represent Accenture from an entrepreneur perspective, not a services position, because I've been there and done it, and I have empathy for everybody and great and deep respect for everybody that does it, including yourself, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. The feeling is hugely mutual. I mean, I still have so much I can learn from you. Kind of a final note, a sort of a personal note to the comments you were just making about startups and life balance, et cetera, is I found myself, I mean, both of us have had many conversations, and I know how important family is to you and vice versa, et cetera. And I was literally in mid-conversation with my wife, and my co-founder popped up on my phone calling me, and I didn't even think. I just, mid-conversation with him, I picked up and answered. And it's like, it took me like 3 minutes to realize, what the Mark, do you realize what you just did to your wife? And so that is a huge risk, and keeping an eye on that is important. Yeah.
It's a tough one. We're all driven by our passions, and our passions for our family, our passions for our work are two very, very different things. But there's more passion in a startup than there may be in maybe a larger company where you don't have as much impact, or you have you're a piece of it. So you have to be careful of that gravitational pull. But I know you, Mark. You've been doing this for a long time. You are going to be just fine. But when you do run into problems, you call me.
I will.
And I'll set you straight on what you need to do and your priorities. And all of us need those kinds of resetting. I had multiple people that helped me along the path. And, we're a community. All of us that have engaged it and taken the risk of being an entrepreneur, we're connected, whether we've ever known each other or not, we're connected. And,
awesome. Yeah.
And that's how we just got to help each other out.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. So Tom, this has been fantastic. I mean, to me, this podcast has been more like a conversation than anything else. And so I really appreciate the chance to catch up with you. And I appreciate the chance of you setting aside some time on our little Edgevana podcast. I think it's been fantastic, and I think the audience will appreciate it. So again, thank you very much for joining.
I was thrilled to be invited. It's always good to talk to you, Mark. Congratulations on Edgevana. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this thing goes forward. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a spotlight deal.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. And when this pandemic is over, I need to find time to sit with you with a favorite drink at the end of the day, looking up the coast like you do on some afternoons. Well, like you used to do before you got stupid and went back to work.
I still do that. I still find time with Tracy to have a cocktail to look at Catalina Island at the end of the day. But
awesome.
You take care, my friend.
You too. Thank you very much, sir. Take care.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to the Edgevana Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening app or on YouTube. To learn more, visit www.edgevana.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us on our next episode.